5 hunters went into the woods. None of them came back. These were not beginners who got lost on unfamiliar trails. These were men with decades of experience, men who knew every tree and ridge in the forests where they disappeared. They carried GPS devices, satellite messengers, rifles, survival gear. They told their families exactly where they would be and when they would return. They never returned. What you are about to hear are 5 cases of experienced hunters who vanished in American forests under circumstances that investigators still cannot explain. In each case, the search teams found evidence that raised more questions than answers. Equipment placed in strange locations, trails that ended abruptly, witness accounts that contradict each other, and details so bizarre that even veteran search and rescue personnel have admitted they have never seen anything like it. The American wilderness is dangerous. Every year, people die from falls, exposure, animal attacks, and simple bad luck. These deaths are tragic but understandable. The cases in this video are different. They involve men who should have survived, who had every advantage, yet still vanished without explanation. If you think experienced hunters do not disappear without a trace, these stories will change your mind. Be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell because you will want to see this through to the end. We begin in the boundary waters of northern Minnesota. The Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness covers more than 1 million acres along the Canadian border. It is one of the most remote regions in the lower 48 states. No roads, no cell towers, no marked trails in most areas. The forest is dense, the lakes are countless, and in winter, temperatures can drop to 40 below zero. For hunters who know what they are doing, it is paradise. For those who do not, it can be a death sentence. Raymond Tesler knew what he was doing. At 57 years old, he had hunted the Boundary Waters for 35 years. He grew up in Ely, Minnesota, and started guiding hunting trips when he was just 16. By 2016, he had led hundreds of clients through terrain that would confuse most experienced outdoorsmen. His friends said he could navigate by the stars, read weather patterns by watching birds, and track animals across bare rock where others saw nothing. On November 8, 2016, Raymond told his wife Margaret that he was going on a solo trip into the Kawashiwi River drainage area. He planned to be gone 3 days, returning on November 11th. He packed food for 5 days, just in case. He carried a GPS unit with satellite messaging, a hunting rifle, a backup handgun, emergency shelter, fire starting gear, and a full first aid kit. Before leaving, he sent his son a photo of all his equipment laid out, a habit they had kept for years. Margaret drove Raymond to the access point at 6:30 in the morning. She watched him shoulder his pack, wave goodbye, and walk into the forest. That was the last time she saw her husband. For the first day and a half, everything had normal. Raymond sent regular updates through his satellite messenger. November 8th, 11:42 in the morning. Reached camp spot. Setting up. November 8th, 6:15 in the evening. Good day scouting. No shots. Deer signs east. November 9th, 7:20 in the morning. Heading northeast. Saw tracks yesterday. November 9th, 2:17 in the afternoon. Found big buck wounded, need to track. That was his last message. When no update came by nightfall, Margaret was not too worried. She knew her husband sometimes got absorbed in tracking and forgot to check in. But when November 10th passed with no contact, she called the St. Louis County Sheriff. By the morning of November 11th, a full search operation was underway. The searchers had one major advantage. Raymond's GPS unit had been recording his location throughout the trip. They knew exactly where he had been. They could trace his movements step by step. What they found made no sense. On November 12th, search teams reached Raymond's last transmitted position, about 4 miles northeast of his campsite. They found evidence that he had taken a shot there. Shell casings on the ground, blood on nearby vegetation. The blood was tested and confirmed to be from a deer. Raymond had wounded an animal and was tracking it, just like his final message said. The tracking team followed his boot prints and the blood trail northwest for about half a mile. Then the blood trail stopped. The deer had either stopped bleeding or gone somewhere the trackers could not follow. But Raymond's boot prints continued. This is where the GPS data became disturbing. According to the device, which was recovered on November 14th, Raymond began walking in a circle at approximately 3:40 in the afternoon on November 9th. The circle was almost perfectly round, about 1.3 miles in diameter. He walked this circle not once, not twice, but 7 times over a period of 9 hours. His pace never changed. 2.7 miles per hour, consistent throughout. No significant stops, no deviation from the circular path. For 9 straight hours, Raymond Tesler, a man who could navigate these woods blindfolded, walked in a perfect circle. At 11:47 that night, the GPS stopped recording movement. The final position was roughly in the center of the circle Raymond had been walking. Search teams reached this location on November 14th. They found his GPS unit on the ground beside a fallen log. His rifle was leaning against a nearby tree. His pack was sitting upright, everything inside neat and organized. Raymond Tesler was gone. The search expanded rapidly. More than 120 people joined the effort. Helicopters flew grid patterns overhead. Ground teams covered every drainage, every cliff face, every possible shelter within miles. The dogs were brought in on November 13th. Their behavior was unusual from the start. At the spot where Raymond's gear was found, the dogs picked up his scent immediately. But when handlers tried to follow the trail, each dog indicated a different direction. One pulled north, another pulled east. A third kept returning to the equipment pile, whining and circling. The lead handler later said he had been doing this work for 20 years and had never seen anything like it. It was as if Raymond had walked away in multiple directions at once. On November 17th, a volunteer found something 2 miles east of where the gear had been discovered. It was Raymond's hunting jacket, draped carefully over a low branch. Inside the pocket was his compass and a small notebook he used for recording observations. The notebook contained normal entries through the afternoon of November 9th. Weather notes, deer signs, terrain observations. But the final pages were different. The handwriting grew shaky and uneven. The last entry read, "Deer led me here, but deer is gone. Ground feels wrong. Need to find way out of circle. Don't know which way is out anymore." Below that were marks that looked like tally marks and some crude drawings that might have been attempts at mapping. At the very bottom of the page, barely legible, were 4 words. "He keeps watching me." The search continued for another 11 days. More than 3,000 acres were covered multiple times. Nothing else was found. No body, no additional equipment, no further clues. Raymond Tesler has never been found. The case remains officially open. His wife Margaret still lives in Ely. She has never remarried. Every November, around the anniversary of his disappearance, she drives out to the area where he vanished. She sits there until dark, then goes home. When asked why, she says she does not know what she is waiting for. She just feels like she should be there. The GPS data has been analyzed many times. No one has explained why an experienced hunter would walk in a perfect circle for 9 hours. The terrain has no features that would cause such a pattern. There are no magnetic anomalies in the area. Raymond knew this region better than almost anyone alive. Some investigators suggested a medical event, a stroke or cardiac episode that caused confusion while still allowing him to walk. But Raymond had no history of such problems. His last physical, just 4 months before the trip, showed him in excellent health. And a person suffering a stroke does not typically walk at a steady pace for 9 consecutive hours. Others suggested he might have encountered someone in the woods who meant him harm. But no other people were known to be in that remote area. No signs of struggle were found, and it does not explain the circular walking or the notebook entry about being watched. A few researchers who study unusual disappearances have noted that the circular walking pattern appears in other cases, in other forests, involving other experienced outdoorsmen who should not have gotten lost. Whether this is coincidence or something else remains unknown. Margaret Tesler believes her husband saw something in those woods, something that frightened him, something that kept him walking in circles for hours before whatever happened next. She does not know what it was. She only knows that Raymond Tesler, who had spent half his life in that wilderness, wrote that he could not find his way out of a circle. His body has never been recovered. His final notebook entry has never been explained. That brings us to our second case, and to a disappearance that happened in plain sight, or as close to plain sight as the wilderness allows. The Mark Twain National Forest in southern Missouri covers about 1.5 million acres across the Ozark Highlands. The terrain is rugged, with steep hollows, dense hardwood forest, and limestone bluffs that create natural barriers and hidden valleys. White-tailed deer thrive here, and the forest has been a destination for hunters since before Missouri became a state. Dennis Harwell grew up in Poplar Bluff, a small city at the edge of the forest. He started hunting at age 12, taught by his father and uncles who had hunted these woods for generations. By the time he was 58, Dennis had spent 46 years learning every ridge and hollow in the area he considered his territory. His friends said he could walk through the forest at night without a flashlight and never miss a step. Paul Crosby was Dennis's best friend and hunting partner. They had met in kindergarten and started hunting together as teenagers. 43 years of shared hunts had made them as close as brothers. They knew each other's habits, signals, and preferences without needing to speak. In the woods, they could communicate with just a glance. On November 15, 2011, opening day of deer season, Dennis and Paul drove out to their usual spot in the Poplar Bluff unit of the Mark Twain National Forest. They parked at a familiar trailhead at 4:30 in the morning, planning to reach their stands before first light. The weather was clear and cold, about 32 degrees. Perfect conditions for the opener. They hiked in together for about 45 minutes, following a route they had walked countless times. At 5:15, they reached the spot where they always separated. Dennis would continue north to a tree stand he had set up weeks earlier. Paul would head west to a ground blind about 200 yards away. At that distance, they could hear each other shout if needed. Paul later said Dennis seemed in great spirits that morning. He talked about his grandchildren, a fishing trip he was planning for spring, and his confidence that they would both have deer down by noon. At 5:15, they went their separate ways. Dennis headed north, Paul headed west. Paul reached his blind at about 5:25 and settled in to wait for dawn. The forest was quiet. He heard the usual sounds, small animals moving, an owl calling in the distance. Nothing unusual. At 6:43, a single rifle shot broke the silence. It came from Dennis's direction. Paul waited. Normally, after a shot, Dennis would either fire again if the deer was not down clean, or call out to signal a kill. Paul heard nothing. He sent a text message. "You get him?" No response. He tried calling Dennis's phone. It rang, but no one answered. By 7:30, Paul was worried. Dennis was the most reliable person he knew. If he had taken a shot, he would have communicated something by now. Paul left his blind and walked toward Dennis's tree stand. What he found there still haunts him. The stand was empty. Dennis's rifle was leaning against the base of the tree. His backpack hung from a branch where he would have placed it while climbing. The climbing sticks were still attached to the trunk. Up on the platform, the safety straps were unbuckled and lying loose. Dennis was not there. Paul checked the ground around the tree. The soil was soft from recent rain, and he could clearly see boot prints leading to the tree, prints that matched Dennis's boots. He walked around the entire area, searching for tracks leading away. There were none. He called Dennis's name again and again. The forest gave no answer. At 8:22, Paul called 911. The sheriff's department responded quickly, and by midday, a full search was underway. Deputies, volunteer firefighters, and search and rescue teams spread out through the forest. Dogs were brought in that afternoon. The dogs picked up Dennis's scent without trouble. They tracked him from his truck to the separation point, then north to the tree stand. At the base of the tree, they indicated strongly that Dennis had been there recently. But when handlers tried to track him leaving, the dogs could not establish a trail. They circled the tree stand repeatedly, growing agitated and confused. One handler reported that his dog kept returning to the exact same spot at the base of the tree, sitting down and looking up at him as if to say, "This is where it ends." Another handler, a man with more than 20 years of experience, later said he had never seen dogs behave this way. They acted like the person had simply ceased to exist at that location. The shot Paul heard at 6:43 was investigated. Dennis's rifle had been fired once. A shell casing was found at the base of the tree, consistent with him having taken a shot from the stand. But no blood trail was found anywhere in the area. Whatever Dennis had shot at, he either missed completely or hit something that left no trace. The search continued for over a week. More than 3,000 acres were covered. Other hunters who had been in the area that morning were interviewed. None of them had seen Dennis. None had noticed anything unusual. On November 22nd, 7 days after Dennis disappeared, a hunter in a completely different part of the Mark Twain National Forest found something strange. It was an orange hunting cap, the same type Dennis had been wearing when he left home. The cap was hanging from a tree branch about 7 feet off the ground. The location was approximately 11 miles from Dennis's tree stand. The hunter who found it reported that the cap was not snagged or tangled in the branches. It was placed there, hanging by its adjustment strap as if someone had deliberately hooked it over the branch. The opening faced outward. DNA testing confirmed the cap belonged to Dennis Harwell. No one has explained how the cap got there. Dennis was 5 feet 9 inches tall. Even reaching up, he could not have placed something on a branch 7 feet high without something to stand on. No ladder, no stump, no rocks were found nearby. And 11 miles is a long way to travel through dense forest. Even for an experienced woodsman moving at a steady pace, covering that distance would take most of a day. Dennis would have had to start walking immediately after the rifle shot Paul heard at 6:43 and walk without stopping for hours. But there were no tracks leading away from his tree stand. The dogs found no trail. He simply was not there. And then his cap appeared 11 miles away at an impossible height. The official investigation considered several theories. Some thought Dennis might have had a medical emergency, a heart attack or stroke that caused him to become confused and wander. But this does not explain the lack of tracks at the tree stand, or how he could have traveled 11 miles while incapacitated, or how his cap ended up on a high branch. Others suggested foul play. Maybe someone had been in the woods, someone who attacked Dennis and moved his body. But no other people were known to be in that area. Paul was only 200 yards away and heard only the single rifle shot. No sounds of struggle, no voices, nothing unusual. And why would an attacker take the body but leave the rifle and backpack, then travel 11 miles to hang a cap in a tree? A few people suggested animal predation, that a bear or pack of coyotes might have dragged Dennis away. But there was no blood at the scene, no signs of attack, and animals do not hang caps on tree branches. Paul Crosby stopped hunting after that day. He sold all his equipment and has not set foot in the Mark Twain National Forest since. He developed anxiety so severe that his doctor put him on medication. He keeps all the blinds in his house closed, even during the day. When asked about what happened, he says only that something took his friend. He does not know what, but he knows it was not natural. Dennis Harwell's wife, Linda, still lives in Poplar Bluff. She has kept all of Dennis's hunting gear in the garage, cleaned and maintained, as if he might come back for it someday. Every November 15th, on the anniversary of the disappearance, she drives out to the trailhead where Dennis and Paul parked that morning. She sits in her car until dark, watching the tree line. She has done this for more than a decade. She has never seen anything, but she keeps going back. Dennis Harwell has never been found. No further evidence has ever surfaced. The case remains open. 200 yards. That is how far Paul was from his best friend. Close enough to hear a rifle shot. Close enough to shout and be heard. Yet something happened to Dennis that made no sound and left no trace. Only that cap, 11 miles away, 7 feet high, hanging on a branch as if placed there by someone or something that wanted it to be found. But the next case we will examine raises even more troubling questions, because in this disappearance, we have something rare. Physical evidence that actually shows us what happened, or at least what appears to have happened, because what the evidence shows should not be possible. We will get to that case in Part 2. If you are as disturbed by these stories as you should be, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. We have 3 more cases to cover, and they only get stranger from here. Drop a comment below with your theories about what happened to Raymond and Dennis. We read every comment, and some of you have insights that genuinely help us understand these cases better. Part 2 is coming soon. You do not want to miss it. The Allegheny National Forest in northwestern Pennsylvania is not as famous as some other hunting destinations, but those who know it consider it among the best whitetail and black bear territory in the eastern United States. The forest covers more than 500,000 acres of rolling hills, deep valleys, and dense hardwood stands. Unlike many national forests, the Allegheny is a patchwork of public and private land, which makes navigation tricky, even for experienced hunters. Old logging roads crisscross the terrain, some marked on maps and others forgotten for decades. William Renner knew these roads better than most. At 61 years old, he had been hunting the Allegheny for over 30 years. He grew up in nearby Warren, Pennsylvania, and had been exploring these woods since he was a teenager. Unlike some hunters who relied mainly on instinct, William was methodical. He kept detailed journals going back decades, recording weather patterns, animal movements, successful and unsuccessful strategies. His notes filled several shelves in his home office. Before each trip, he would spend hours reviewing old entries, looking for patterns that might give him an edge. His friends called him the Professor because of his analytical approach, but his results spoke for themselves. William consistently brought home game when others came back empty-handed. On November 23, 2019, the Saturday after Thanksgiving, William told his wife Karen that he was going out to scout some remote areas he had not visited in a few years. Bear season was in its final days, and he had not yet filled his tag. He wanted to check for fresh sign that might guide his last hunting efforts. William drove to a small parking area off Forest Road 127, about 14 miles from the nearest paved road. He parked at 6:45 in the morning and headed east into the forest. Unlike many hunters, William carried multiple tracking and communication devices. He had a GPS unit, a satellite messenger that could send text updates even without cell service, a two-way radio, and a fully charged cell phone. He knew most of the area had no signal, but he believed in redundancy. If one device failed, another would work. He promised Karen he would check in every 2 hours. The first check-in came at 9:15. William reported that he was about 3 miles east of the truck, moving through dense hemlock. He had found old bear sign, but nothing fresh. He ended with checking the creek bottom next. The second check-in came at 11:22. His position had shifted nearly 2 miles to the southeast. He had found fresh bear scat and tracks along a small stream. He was optimistic about returning to hunt the area during the remaining season days. He noted that clouds were moving in and temperatures were dropping. The third check-in was scheduled for 1:22 in the afternoon. It never came. Karen waited until 3 o'clock, sending several messages through the satellite system. No response. At 4:30, with daylight fading, she called the Warren County Sheriff. The remote location and worsening weather made the initial response difficult. By the time deputies reached William's truck, light snow had started falling. Using his satellite messenger data, they established his last known position, about 5 miles into the forest in some of the most rugged terrain in the area. A full search launched at dawn on November 24th. More than 80 people participated, including sheriff's deputies, forest rangers, volunteers, and specialists from the Pennsylvania Emergency Management Agency. 3 helicopters provided aerial support until the weather forced them to ground. Search teams reached William's last transmitted location by mid-morning. They found clear evidence that he had been there. boot prints in the soft ground, his walking stick, a hand-carved oak staff he had made years earlier, leaning against a tree, his pack sitting on a flat rock beside a small stream. The pack contained his food, extra clothing, first aid kit, and GPS unit. The GPS showed his route throughout the morning, matching his satellite messages. The data ended at 12:47, about 90 minutes after his last check-in. But certain items were not in the pack. His satellite messenger, cell phone, radio, rifle, water bottle, and binoculars were all missing. It appeared William had set down his pack, kept some equipment, and walked away. The question was, in which direction? The tracking effort that followed was unlike anything the searchers had experienced. Within a few hundred yards of the pack, they found William's boot prints heading in 3 different directions. One set of tracks led north, uphill toward a rocky ridgeline. Another set led southeast, deeper into a valley. A third set led southwest, back toward the general direction of his truck. 3 trails from one man. 3 directions at once. The searchers initially assumed they must be looking at prints from different times, that William had explored the area before settling on one path. But when they followed each trail, the evidence became more disturbing. The northern track climbed steadily for about 400 yards, then stopped at the base of a large boulder formation. The prints just ended. No tracks led away. Searchers checked every possible route from those boulders and found nothing. It was as if William had walked up to the rocks and vanished. The southeastern track led into increasingly difficult terrain. Searchers followed it for nearly half a mile before losing it in a rocky streambed. Despite extensive searching beyond the streambed, no more prints were found. The southwestern track was the strangest of all. The prints were visible for about 200 yards, but as they progressed, they changed. The stride length got shorter. The impressions in the soil got shallower. The angle of the footprints shifted, suggesting William was walking more and more slowly. A forensic tracking expert who examined the trail later said he had never seen anything like it. Each step seemed lighter than the one before. The final prints were barely visible, just faint impressions in the soft earth. He said it looked like whoever made them was walking on tiptoe, and then nothing. The track simply stopped, in the middle of open ground with clear sightlines in every direction. The expert wrote in his report, "If I did not know better, I would say it looked like someone gradually disappearing as they walked. Dogs were brought in multiple times. Their results were inconsistent. Some handlers reported their dogs tracking north, toward the boulder formation. Others said their dogs pulled southeast. One handler said his dog refused to track at all, showing what he called avoidance behavior. The search continued for 2 weeks. Thousands of acres were covered. Helicopters flew until the weather made it impossible. On December 8th, a volunteer found William's binoculars about 1.4 miles north of where his pack had been discovered. They were sitting upright on a fallen log, positioned as if placed there deliberately. The log was in a small clearing surrounded by dense vegetation. The clearing had been searched on December 2nd. Multiple searchers confirmed walking past that log. None of them had seen any binoculars. 3 days later, on December 11th, William's rifle was found even farther north, nearly 2 miles from the pack. It was leaning against a tree at the edge of a cliff overlooking a steep ravine. The rifle was unloaded. The magazine was still in place, but all the cartridges had been removed. The ammunition was never found. The ravine below was searched thoroughly. No body, no clothing, no sign that anyone had fallen or climbed into the gorge. William Renner has never been found. His satellite messenger, cell phone, and radio have never been recovered. The cartridges from his rifle are still missing. Karen Renner has gone through her husband's journals many times, looking for anything that might explain what happened. She found nothing unusual. His last entry, written the night before his final trip, was completely ordinary. Weather looks decent for Saturday. Want to check east side of Black Snake Creek? Good bear country if they have not moved yet. The investigation considered various explanations. Some suggested William might have encountered another person in the forest who harmed him and scattered his equipment. but no other vehicles were at nearby access points. No other hunters were known to be in that area, and it does not explain the 3 diverging sets of footprints or the gradually fading tracks. Others proposed a medical event that caused confusion and erratic behavior. This might explain walking in multiple directions, but it does not explain how his equipment ended up spread across 2 miles of terrain, all of it placed carefully rather than dropped. The forensic tracker who examined the southwestern footprint sequence has not changed his assessment. He maintains that the trail looked like someone fading away mid-step. He has no explanation for what he observed. He only knows what the evidence showed. 3 sets of tracks, leaving 1 backpack. 1 set that grew lighter and lighter until it simply stopped. Equipment scattered across miles of forest, appearing in locations that had already been searched. William Renner was a methodical man. He planned every trip carefully, took notes on everything, believed in redundancy and preparation. He carried 4 separate communication devices into the forest that day. None of them helped. None of them recorded what happened after 12:47 on November 23rd. His wife Karen still keeps his journals on the shelf in his office. She has not touched them since finishing her review. She says she still expects him to walk through the door sometimes, especially in late November when the hunting season returns. She does not know what happened to her husband. She does not believe he simply got lost. The forest took him, she says. That is all she knows for certain. The next 2 cases we will examine add new dimensions to these disappearances. In one, a trail camera captured images that should not exist. In another, a voice was heard from an impossible distance. We will cover those cases in part 2. Subscribe now so you do not miss it. And if you have spent time in remote forests, if you have ever felt something watching you that you could not see, if you have ever experienced something in the wilderness that you could not explain, tell us about it in the comments. You are not alone. More people have had these experiences than you might think. Part 2 is coming. Stay with us. Welcome back. If you have not seen Part 1, go watch it first. The cases build on each other, and you need to understand the patterns before we go further. In Part 1, we covered 3 hunters who vanished under circumstances that make no sense. Raymond Tesler walked in perfect circles for 9 hours before disappearing, leaving behind a notebook entry about being watched. Dennis Harwell vanished from a tree stand, while his best friend sat 200 yards away, and his cap turned up 11 miles away, hanging 7 feet off the ground. William Renner left 3 sets of footprints going in 3 different directions, one of them fading gradually until the tracks simply stopped. Each case left behind evidence. Each piece of evidence raised more questions than it answered. The next 2 cases take this even further, because in these disappearances, we do not just have strange physical evidence, we have recordings, images and audio that should tell us what happened. They do not. If anything, they make the mystery deeper. Let us begin with a hunter whose own trail camera captured his final hours in the forest. The Daniel Boone National Forest covers more than 700,000 acres of eastern Kentucky. The terrain is classic Appalachia: steep hollows, sandstone cliffs, dense hardwood forests, and countless small streams cutting through narrow valleys. Visibility can drop to a few yards once you step off the ridges. A person can become disoriented within minutes of leaving a trail, even in areas they think they know. Curtis Blackwood knew this forest as well as anyone. At 53 years old, he had been hunting these mountains for nearly 4 decades. He grew up in Moorhead, Kentucky, and his grandfather had first taken him into the hollows when he was barely old enough to walk. By the time he was a teenager, Curtis was spending more time in the woods than out of them. He developed a reputation among local hunters as someone who understood deer movement better than anyone else. Part of this was experience. Part of it was his obsession with documentation. Curtis had been photographing deer sign and setting trail cameras years before most hunters knew what a trail camera was. By 2017, he had more than a dozen cameras deployed throughout his hunting areas, capturing thousands of images every season. He reviewed the footage constantly, cataloging every deer, every predator, every pattern he could identify. On October 28, 2017, Curtis drove to a remote section of the forest near the Red River Gorge to check his cameras and do some preseason scouting. Rifle season would open in 2 weeks, and he wanted to confirm that the deer patterns he had been tracking were holding. He told his wife Barbara he would be checking 4 camera locations spread across about 3 miles of difficult terrain. He expected to be back before dark. Curtis parked at a small pullout off a Forest Service road at 7:15 in the morning. Another hunter, a man named Dale Eversole, who had crossed paths with Curtis many times over the years, saw him there and stopped to talk. Dale later told investigators that Curtis seemed completely normal, even excited about the upcoming season. They talked for about 5 minutes, discussing deer sign they had each observed, then went their separate ways. Dale headed south. Curtis headed northeast into the hollow. That was the last time anyone saw Curtis Blackwood alive. When Curtis did not return by dark, Barbara was concerned, but not panicked. Her husband sometimes stayed out longer than planned when he found interesting sign. But when he had not returned by 10 o'clock and was not answering his phone, she called the Wolfe County Sheriff. Deputies found Curtis's truck at the pullout the next morning. The vehicle was locked and appeared undisturbed. Based on the camera locations Curtis had shared with his wife, searchers headed into the forest. The first camera was found at about 9:30 in the morning, still attached to its tree and working normally. Boot prints nearby confirmed Curtis had visited the site. The second camera, about a mile deeper into the hollow, showed the same evidence. Curtis had been there, checked the device, and moved on. At the third camera location, things became strange. The camera was gone. Curtis had mounted it on a large oak tree overlooking a natural funnel where deer regularly traveled. The tree still had marks from the mounting straps, but the camera itself had vanished. Searchers checked the immediate area and found no boot prints. The ground was soft enough to hold tracks, but there was no sign that Curtis had approached the tree at all. The fourth camera location was about 3/4 of a mile further northeast, near a spring that attracted wildlife year-round. Searchers reached this site at 11:45 in the morning. The camera was there, still attached to its tree, but it was facing the wrong direction. Barbara had helped Curtis set up this particular camera. She knew exactly how it had been positioned, aimed southeast, covering the spring and the approach trail. When searchers found it, the camera was facing northwest, pointing back toward the direction Curtis would have come from. Someone had turned the camera around. The searchers retrieved the SD card and continued looking for Curtis. The search expanded over the following days, eventually involving more than 80 personnel, helicopters, and dog teams. But the real focus of the investigation became what was on that SD card. Barbara was present when investigators reviewed the footage. The first images were normal. Deer moving through the frame at various times, a coyote at 2:14 in the morning on October 25th, a turkey hen with juveniles on October 26th. Standard trail camera material. Then came October 28th. At 8:47 in the morning, Curtis appeared in frame. He was walking toward the camera, wearing his usual hunting clothes with an orange vest visible. His pack was on his back. He walked up to the camera and reached toward it, probably to check the battery or swap the SD card. The image showed him from the chest up, his face clearly visible. The next image was time-stamped 9:15 in the morning. Curtis appeared again, walking past the camera from left to right. He was no longer wearing his pack. His orange vest was gone. He did not look at the camera or stop. He was walking at what appeared to be a normal pace, heading deeper into the hollow. At 9:32, Curtis appeared again. This time he was walking from right to left, back toward where he had come from. He was moving faster, his stride longer. His face looked tense. Again, he did not acknowledge the camera. At 9:51, Curtis appeared a third time, walking left to right again. But his movement was different now. He seemed to be stumbling slightly, his steps less coordinated. He was looking down at the ground instead of ahead. At 10:14, Curtis appeared a fourth time, walking left to right again. His pace had slowed dramatically. He was almost shuffling. His arms hung at his sides. His head was tilted at an angle, turned partially away from the camera. The fifth and final image was captured at 10:38 in the morning. Curtis was not walking. He was standing about 15 feet from the camera, facing it directly. The image showed him from the knees up. His arms were at his sides. His posture was stiff and unnatural. His face showed an expression that Barbara, when she saw it, struggled to describe. His eyes were wide. His mouth was slightly open. He was staring directly into the camera lens. Behind him, partially blocked by his body, there was a dark shape that did not match any tree or feature visible in other images from the same location. The image quality was good enough to identify wildlife, but not good enough to show fine details. Analysts who examined the photograph could not determine what the shape was. It did not appear in any other images from the camera. That was the last photograph. The camera continued to function for several more days until the battery died, but it recorded nothing else. No deer, no animals, no movement of any kind. The investigation raised questions that have never been answered. First, the camera was motion activated. It should only take pictures when something in the frame is moving. In the final image, Curtis appears to be standing still. The only element that might have triggered the camera was the dark shape behind him. Second, the camera captured Curtis walking past 5 times in about 111 minutes, but it never captured him turning around. Each image shows him traveling in a straight line, either left to right or right to left. If he walked past going one direction, he would have had to turn around and walk back to appear again. The camera should have recorded those returns. It did not. Third, the timestamps suggest Curtis was covering significant distance between appearances. Given the terrain, he would have had to walk nearly continuously to leave the frame, travel far enough that his return would not be captured, and come back. Yet some images show him moving slowly, even stumbling. Fourth, in the first image at 8:47, Curtis has his pack and orange vest. By 9:15, both are gone. His pack was never found. His vest was found 11 days later, more than 2 miles away. Search teams eventually covered more than 3,000 acres. Dogs were brought in repeatedly, but their behavior was inconsistent. Handlers reported their animals picking up scent trails that led in different directions, or refusing to track at all. On November 8th, 11 days after Curtis disappeared, a volunteer found his pack about 2 miles northeast of the camera location. It was sitting upright at the base of a cliff, zippers closed, contents intact. His vest was folded neatly on top. 50 yards from the pack, searchers found Curtis's boots. They were placed side by side, laces untied, positioned as if he had simply stepped out of them. His socks were tucked inside. No footprints in socks or bare feet led away from the boots. The ground was soft enough to show tracks, but there were none. Curtis Blackwood's body has never been found. His rifle has never been recovered. The trail camera that was missing from the third location has never turned up. The images on the SD card have been analyzed by both law enforcement and independent researchers. No one has been able to explain what they show. Some investigators suggested Curtis experienced a medical emergency that caused confusion and erratic behavior. This might explain the repetitive walking, but it does not explain the missing camera, the turned camera, the neatly placed pack and boots, or what the dark shape in the final photograph might be. Others suggested someone else was in the forest that day, someone who encountered Curtis and did him harm. But no other vehicles were seen in the area, no other hunters reported being nearby, and the photographs show Curtis alone and moving under his own power until that final image. A few researchers who have studied similar cases noted that certain elements appear repeatedly in these disappearances. Equipment placed neatly rather than dropped, boots removed and positioned carefully, and cameras or other recording devices that capture evidence which seems impossible. Barbara Blackwood has watched the footage from her husband's trail camera many times. She focuses on that final image, the one where Curtis is standing still, staring at the lens with that expression on his face. She says the man in that photograph saw something behind him or around him that terrified him. She does not know what it was. She only knows that whatever her husband saw, it was real. Curtis was not a man who scared easily. He had spent his whole life in those woods. But something in the Daniel Boone National Forest that morning was different. Something he had never encountered before. She keeps the SD card in a safe deposit box. She does not want to lose it. She believes someday it might help explain what happened to her husband. So far, it has explained nothing. If you are finding these cases as unsettling as we think you are, take a moment to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. We have one more case to cover in this section, and it involves evidence even stranger than photographs. It involves a voice from an impossible distance. The Kisatchie National Forest is the only national forest in Louisiana, covering more than 600,000 acres across the central part of the state. The terrain is different from the Appalachian forests we have been discussing. Here, the land is characterized by rolling pine hills, hardwood bottoms along creek drainages, and thick underbrush that can limit visibility to just a few yards. The forest supports healthy populations of white-tailed deer and wild hogs, attracting hunters from across the Gulf South. Gerald and Thomas Hebert were brothers who had hunted in Kisatchie since they were teenagers. Gerald was the older of the two at 59, a retired pipe fitter who had worked in the refineries around Lake Charles for most of his career. Thomas, 56, was still working as a heavy equipment operator for a construction company in Alexandria. Despite the age gap, they had been inseparable since childhood. Hunting was what brought them closest. Their father had first taken them to Kisatchie in the 1970s, and they had returned every season since. They knew one section of the forest particularly well, an area in the Catahoula Ranger District where their family had hunted for 3 generations. They had names for individual trees and landmarks that appeared on no map, a private geography passed down from their father and grandfather before him. On December 14, 2019, the brothers arrived at their usual camping spot, a remote location accessible only by a rough fire road that most vehicles could not handle. They drove Gerald's 4-wheel drive truck, reaching the site at about 3 in the afternoon. They planned to set up camp and hunt the following morning. The afternoon was uneventful. They pitched their tent, gathered firewood, and prepared their gear. They ate dinner as the sun went down and spent the evening by the fire, talking about family matters and past hunts. Thomas later told investigators that Gerald seemed completely normal. He was in good spirits, joking about finally taking a bigger buck than his younger brother. They went to sleep around 9:30, planning to wake before dawn. At approximately 2:15 in the morning, Thomas woke up to the sound of Gerald leaving the tent. This was not unusual. Men their age often needed to get up during the night. Thomas heard footsteps moving away from camp, heard the tent zipper close, and started drifting back to sleep. He never heard Gerald come back. When Thomas woke at 5:20 to prepare for any of his equipment, by 7 o'clock, Thomas was badly worried. He drove out to get cell signal and called the Wynn Parish Sheriff's Office. Deputies reached the campsite by mid-morning, and a search began. The initial assumption was that Gerald had become disoriented during a nighttime bathroom trip and wandered off. But this made no sense to anyone who knew him. Gerald had been coming to this exact spot for decades. He knew every tree within walking distance of the camp. The idea that he would get lost 30 feet from his tent was hard to accept. Dogs were brought in that afternoon. They picked up Gerald's scent from his sleeping bag and tracked it out of the tent, across the small clearing, and into the pine forest to the north. The trail continued for about 200 yards. Then it stopped. The handler reported that her dog circled the spot where the scent ended, whining and agitated. The dog refused to continue in any direction. When pushed, the animal tried to return to camp. A second dog team the next day produced the same results. The trail led north from camp, ended abruptly at the same location, and the dogs could not pick it up again. The search expanded over the following days. Thousands of acres were covered. Helicopters flew grid patterns. Volunteers checked every road, trail, and waterway in the area. On December 17th, 3 days after Gerald disappeared, searchers found something about a mile west of the campsite. It was a small spiral notebook, the kind used for quick notes. Thomas recognized it immediately. It belonged to Gerald, who used it to record hunting observations. The notebook had been in Gerald's pack at the campsite. Thomas had seen it there the morning of the disappearance. The first several pages contained normal notes from earlier in the season. Weather observations, deer sightings, nothing unusual. But the final 3 pages contained entries dated December 15th and 16th, the 2 days after Gerald disappeared. The entry for December 15th read, "Still walking north. Can't find camp. Trees look different now. Tommy must be worried. Tried to yell, but voice won't work right. Saw lights last night between the trees. Not flashlights. Different. Staying away from them." The entry for December 16th read, "Found creek, but don't recognize it. Drank some water. Feet hurt bad. Lost one sock somewhere. The lights were closer last night. Think they know where I am. Heard something big moving in the brush. Not a hog. Too quiet. Going to try going west today. Hope Tommy finds this." The final entry had no date. It was only 2 lines. Should not have followed it out of the tent. It was not what I thought it was. The handwriting was analyzed by forensic document experts. The results were definitive. The handwriting was Gerald Hebert's. Comparisons with known samples showed matching letter formations, pressure patterns, and other identifying characteristics. Gerald wrote those entries, but he disappeared in the early morning of December 14th. The notebook was found on December 17th. If Gerald wrote entries dated December 15th and 16th, he was alive and moving through the forest during the same time that search teams were looking for him. How did they not find him? How did he not hear the helicopters, the search teams calling his name, the dogs? The search area was not that large. A man walking through the forest should have been located, especially one who was apparently alive and mobile for at least 2 days. The investigators expanded the search westward, based on Gerald's stated intention to travel that direction. They found nothing. No footprints, no additional belongings, no sign of passage. Then came December 21st, 1 week after the disappearance. Thomas had returned to Alexandria, but kept his 2-way radio on at all times. It was the same radio he and Gerald used to communicate during hunts. At 3:40 in the morning, the radio crackled to life. The voice that came through was Gerald's. Thomas recorded the transmission on his cell phone. The recording has since been analyzed by multiple experts. The audio quality is poor, broken up by static, but the words can be made out. Gerald's voice said, "Tommy, I am still here. Can't find the way back. Everything looks the same, no matter which way I walk. The lights are gone now, but something else is here. Tried to leave markers, but they disappear. I can hear the road sometimes, but when I walk toward it, there is only more trees. Tell Marie I love her. Tell the kids. Keep looking, Tommy. I am trying to get back." The transmission lasted about 35 seconds, then dissolved into static. Thomas tried to respond, calling Gerald's name over and over. There was no reply. The radio Gerald carried was a standard handheld unit with a range of about 2 miles under good conditions, less in dense forest. Thomas was in Alexandria, more than 40 miles away. For Gerald to transmit to Thomas at that distance should have been impossible. Communications experts analyzed the recording. They confirmed that the transmission characteristics matched the specific radio model Gerald owned. They could not explain how the signal traveled that far. Some mentioned atmospheric skip, a phenomenon where radio waves bounce off the upper atmosphere. But this typically affects different frequencies than the ones these radios used. The sheriff's department resumed active searching after the transmission. They found nothing. Gerald Hebert has never been found. His radio has never been recovered. No further transmissions have been received. Thomas keeps the radio on his nightstand, turned on, every night. Some nights he says he hears static that almost sounds like breathing. He does not know if it is his imagination. Gerald's wife Marie has talked to each of the investigators and experts who worked the case. None of them can explain the notebook entries or the radio transmission. She says her husband was not a man who made things up. If he wrote that he saw strange lights between the trees, he saw them. If he wrote that he followed something out of the tent that was not what he thought it was, then something was there. What it was, she cannot say. The notebook is in evidence storage at the Wynne Parish Sheriff's Office. The recording of the radio transmission has been copied and preserved by the family. Every December, around the anniversary of that night, Thomas drives back to Kisatchie and parks at the old camping spot. He does not camp there anymore. He just sits in his truck with the radio on, listening. So far, he has heard nothing but static. The investigation remains open. Gerald Hebert is still classified as a missing person. Two brothers who had hunted together their whole lives. A campsite they knew better than their own backyards. One walked out of the tent in the middle of the night in his socks and never came back. He left behind a notebook with entries written after he supposedly vanished. He transmitted a radio message from an impossible distance. He wrote about lights in the trees and something that wasn't what he thought it was. What did Gerald Hebert follow out of that tent? What did he see in the forest that night? Why could search teams not find him when his own writings suggest he was alive and walking for at least 2 days? We do not know. The evidence exists, but it does not add up to an explanation. It adds up to more questions. We have now covered 5 cases of experienced hunters who vanished in American forests. Men who knew what they were doing. Men who had proper equipment and communication devices. Men who should have come home. Each case has its own particular strangeness. Circular walking patterns. Impossible distances. Footprints that fade away. Trail camera images that show someone walking back and forth without ever turning around. Notebook entries dated after a disappearance. Radio transmissions that traveled 40 miles on a 2-mile radio. But there is one more case to examine. And in some ways, it is the most disturbing of all. Because this disappearance had witnesses. 4 men went into the forest together. 3 came out. And none of them can agree on what happened. Their accounts do not differ in small details. They differ in fundamental ways. Each man is certain of what he saw. Each man's version contradicts the others. All 3 have passed polygraph examinations. That case, and our final thoughts on what might be happening in these forests, will be covered in Part 3. Subscribe now if you have not already. Turn on notifications so you know when Part 3 drops. And leave a comment with your thoughts on what we have covered so far. What do you think happened to Curtis Blackwood? What did Gerald Hebert follow out of his tent? We read every comment. Some of you have perspectives that genuinely help us understand these cases. Part 3 is coming soon. It is the conclusion of this series, and you do not want to miss it. Welcome back. This is the final part of our investigation into hunters who vanished in American forests under circumstances that have never been explained. If you have not watched parts 1 and 2, stop here and go back. You need to understand what came before to grasp what we are about to cover. In Part 1, we examined 3 cases. Raymond Tesler, who walked in circles for 9 hours before disappearing, leaving a notebook entry about being watched. Dennis Harwell, who vanished from a tree stand while his friend sat 200 yards away, his cap later found 11 miles away at an impossible height. William Renner, whose footprints led in 3 directions at once, one set fading gradually until the tracks simply stopped. In Part 2, we covered 2 more cases. Curtis Blackwood, whose own trail camera captured him walking past the same spot 5 times before a final image showed him standing rigid. Something dark and shapeless visible behind him. Gerald Hebert, who walked out of his tent in the middle of the night and was never seen again, but left notebook entries dated after his disappearance and somehow transmitted a radio message across 40 miles. Each case involved experienced hunters. Each left behind evidence that raises more questions than answers, and each remains officially unsolved. Now we come to our final case. In some ways, it is the strangest of all, because this disappearance had witnesses. 4 men entered the forest together. 3 of them came out, and to this day, none of them can agree on what they saw. The Ouachita National Forest covers nearly 1.8 million acres across central Arkansas and southeastern Oklahoma. It is the oldest national forest in the southern United States, established in 1907. The terrain consists of long east-west mountain ridges, steep valleys, and dense mixed forest. Deer and bear populations are healthy, and hunters have been working these woods for generations. The four men who entered the Ouachita on November 9, 2021, had hunted together for over 15 years. They called themselves the Mina Group, named after the small Arkansas town where three of them had grown up. Their annual November trip was a tradition none of them would miss. Howard Phelps was 62 years old, a retired postal worker and the unofficial leader of the group. He had been hunting the Ouachita since his 20s and knew the forest well. The others usually followed his lead on where to hunt and how to approach the terrain. Donald Briggs was 58, Howard's brother-in-law. He worked as a maintenance supervisor at a plant in Mina and had been hunting with Howard for more than 30 years. He was known as the careful one, always double-checking equipment and insisting on safety protocols. Michael Carver was 54, a high school football coach from DeQueen, Arkansas. He had joined the group about 12 years earlier after meeting Howard at an equipment sale. He was the most physically fit of the four, a former college athlete who still worked out regularly. Eugene Watts was 60 years old, a semi-retired electrician from Broken Bow, Oklahoma. He was the quiet one. He rarely talked, but he noticed everything. The others joked that Eugene could spot a bedded deer at 200 yards through thick brush. These four men had shared dozens of hunting trips without any serious problems. They knew each other's habits. They trusted each other. Their November 2021 trip was supposed to be routine. They arrived at their usual camping area in the Womble Ranger District on November 8th. They set up camp, checked their equipment, and discussed plans for the next morning. Howard had been scouting the area and had found what he believed was a major deer movement corridor about 2 miles north of camp. The plan was to get there before dawn and spread out along the corridor. The morning of November 9th started normally. They woke at 4:30, had a quick breakfast, and left camp at about 5:15. The weather was cold and clear, temperatures in the upper 20s with no wind. Good conditions. They reached the area Howard had scouted just as the sky started to lighten. There they split up according to plan. Howard took a position on the west end of the corridor. Donald set up about 150 yards to the east. Michael went another 200 yards past Donald. Eugene anchored the east end, roughly 500 yards from Howard. The positioning allowed them to cover a good stretch of the corridor while staying within reasonable distance of each other. They had used similar setups many times before. For the first 2 hours, nothing unusual happened. Then at about 7:45, Donald heard 2 shots from Michael's direction. At 8:03, Michael radioed the group. He had downed a buck and needed help dragging it out. Howard and Donald started moving toward Michael's position. Eugene radioed that he would stay put for another 30 minutes in case more deer came through, then join them. At approximately 8:35, Eugene's voice came over the radio. His message was brief. "There is someone else out here." Howard responded, asking Eugene to clarify. No reply. Howard tried several more times. Nothing. The 3 men decided to move toward Eugene's last position. They marked Michael's deer for later and headed east. What happened next is where the accounts diverge. We will present each man's version of events. Keep in mind that all 3 have been interviewed multiple times. All 3 have passed polygraph examinations. All 3 maintain that they are telling the truth. According to Howard Phelps, he and Donald and Michael walked for about 15 minutes before reaching the area where Eugene should have been. They found his rifle leaning against a tree. They found his pack on the ground nearby. They found his orange vest draped over a low branch. Eugene was not there. Howard said he immediately felt something was wrong. The forest seemed too quiet. The air felt heavy. He experienced what he described as a pressure in his head, like the start of a bad headache. It came on suddenly and made it hard to think clearly. The 3 men searched the immediate area, calling Eugene's name. At one point, Howard heard what sounded like Eugene's voice, responding from somewhere to the north. He could not make out the words, but the tone sounded distressed. He moved toward the sound, but found nothing. Howard's account states that the search continued for about 40 minutes before they decided to return to camp and call for help. During this time, he saw nothing unusual except for the abandoned equipment. The main thing he remembers is the pressure sensation, which faded after they left the area. According to Donald Briggs, the initial sequence matches Howard's account. But when Donald describes reaching Eugene's position, the details are completely different. Donald said they did not find Eugene's equipment neatly arranged. Instead, the rifle was on the ground, partially buried under fallen leaves as if it had been there for a long time. The pack was open, its contents scattered in a rough circle about 15 feet across. The orange vest was torn and hanging from a branch about 10 feet off the ground, too high for Eugene to have placed it there himself. Donald also reported seeing something the others did not mention. About 50 yards to the north, partially obscured by trees, Donald saw what he thought was Eugene, standing still. He called out and started walking toward the figure. As he got closer, maybe 30 yards away, Donald realized something was wrong. The figure was not moving at all, not shifting weight, not turning toward his voice, no small movements that a living person makes constantly. It was completely still. Then, according to Donald, the figure was simply not there anymore. He did not see it move or walk away. It was there, and then it was not. Donald searched the spot where the figure had been standing. He found nothing, no tracks, no sign anyone had been there. Donald did not hear Eugene's voice during the search. He did not experience any pressure or headache. He said the forest seemed normal in every way, except for what he had just witnessed. According to Michael Carver, Michael's account differs from both Howard's and Donald's. When Michael describes reaching Eugene's position, he said they found nothing at all. No rifle, no pack, no vest, nothing. The area looked, in his words, like nobody had ever been there. Michael did not see any figure. He did not hear Eugene's voice. He did not experience any unusual sensations, but he heard something. While searching, Michael heard movement in the brush to the east. The sound was rhythmic, like footsteps, but too fast, too regular. He compared it to someone running, except the spacing between the sounds was wrong. The interval was too short for any natural running gait. Michael moved toward the sound. According to his account, the sound moved away from him, maintaining a constant distance no matter how fast he walked. He pursued it for about 5 minutes before stopping. When he stopped, the sound stopped. When he started walking again, it started again. This happened 3 or 4 more times before Michael gave up and returned to the others. Here is where Michael's account becomes strangest of all. Michael said that when he rejoined Howard and Donald, they acted as if he had only been gone a few seconds. He told them he had been chasing the sound for at least 5 minutes. They insisted he had taken maybe 3 steps away from them, paused briefly, and come right back. Michael maintains he was gone for several minutes. Howard and Donald maintain he was gone for a few seconds at most. All 3 have been consistent in their accounts. All 3 passed polygraph tests. The search for Eugene Watts involved more than 150 personnel over 8 days. The area where he had been positioned was examined in detail. But here is another problem. The searchers could not agree on what they found. Some searchers reported finding Eugene's rifle partially buried, consistent with Donald's account. Others found it leaning against a tree, consistent with Howard's version. Others found nothing at all, matching what Michael described. The official reports contain these contradictions. Different searchers on different days filed reports that do not match each other. Some of this might be explained by equipment being moved during the search. But the discrepancies appeared from the very first day, before any organized searching had disturbed the scene. Dogs were brought in on the second day. Their behavior was unusual. The dogs tracked Eugene's scent from camp to his hunting position without any problem. But at that location, according to the primary handler, the trail reversed. The dogs indicated that Eugene had walked to his position, then walked back toward camp, following exactly the same path he had taken in. Searchers confirmed that Eugene had not returned to camp. His belongings were still in his tent. His vehicle was still parked where he had left it, but the dogs insisted his scent trail led back the way he came. On the fourth day, a volunteer found Eugene's watch about 1.7 miles northwest of his hunting position. The watch was resting on a flat rock beside a small stream, positioned face up as if deliberately placed there. The watch had stopped at 6:47. The date display showed November 9th. Whether this was 6:47 in the morning or evening could not be determined. The watch was in working condition. It had simply stopped. When a new battery was inserted, it ran normally. The location where the watch was found had been searched on the second day. Multiple searchers confirmed walking past that rock. None of them saw any watch there. Eugene Watts has never been found. The 3 surviving members of the Mina group have not hunted together since that day. They remain friends, but something changed between them. Each man believes his own account is accurate. Each man knows the others experienced something different. Howard Phelps has said that he cannot enter any forest now without feeling that pressure sensation, the one he felt when they were searching for Eugene. It comes and goes. Sometimes it is faint. Sometimes it makes him turn around and leave. Donald Briggs has recurring dreams about the figure he saw, the one that was standing there and then was not. In the dreams, he gets closer before it vanishes. He says he does not want to know what he would see if he reached it. Michael Carver sometimes hears that sound, the too fast footsteps, even when he is far from any forest. He heard it once in a parking lot, once in his own backyard. He does not know what it means. Eugene's wife Sandra has met with each of the 3 men separately. She has told interviewers that she believes all of them are telling the truth. She also believes something interfered with their perceptions that morning, made each of them experience something different. When asked what that something might be, she has no answer. She only knows that it has her husband, and whatever it is still out there. The investigation remains open. Eugene Watts is still classified as a missing person. His body has never been recovered. No further evidence has been found. 4 men entered the Ouachita National Forest on November 9th, 2021. 3 came out. They were together when their friend vanished. They were within a few hundred yards of him. They went looking for him immediately. They found 3 different things, or they found nothing at all, depending on who you ask. How is that possible? We do not know. That concludes the 6 cases we set out to examine. But before we end, let us consider what we have learned. 6 experienced hunters. Men with decades of experience in the forests where they disappeared. Men with proper equipment, communication devices, survival training. Men who knew exactly where they were and how to get home. None of them came home. In each case, the search efforts were substantial. Dogs, helicopters, hundreds of volunteers. In each case, evidence was found. But the evidence did not lead to answers. It led to more questions. Certain elements appear in multiple cases. Dogs losing trails abruptly. Not gradually, not at water crossings or rocky ground where scent might naturally disperse. The trails simply end, as if the person stopped existing at that spot. Equipment found in locations that had already been searched. Curtis Blackwood's binoculars appearing on a log that searchers had walked past days earlier. Eugene Watts's watch on a rock that multiple people had passed. Gerald Hebert's notebook turning up in an area that had been covered. Items placed carefully rather than dropped. Boots positioned side by side. Packs sitting upright. Vests folded or draped. The arrangement suggests intention, not accident. But whose intention? Circular or repetitive movement patterns. Raymond Tesler walking the same circle for 9 hours. Curtis Blackwood photographed walking past the same spot 5 times. These were not confused wanderings. They were repetitive, almost mechanical movements that make no sense for experienced woodsmen. References to being watched or followed. Raymond's notebook entry about someone watching him. Gerald's entries about lights in the trees and something that wasn't what he thought. Eugene's final radio transmission about someone else being out there. And in the cases with multiple witnesses, contradictory accounts. Not small discrepancies, but fundamental differences in what people saw and experienced. As if reality itself was not consistent from one observer to another. What does this add up to? We do not know. We can say what it probably is not. These do not appear to be ordinary cases of hunters getting lost. These were men who knew the terrain. Men who do not get lost in areas they have hunted for decades. These do not appear to be animal attacks. No blood at the scenes. No signs of struggle. No scattered remains, despite extensive searching. These do not appear to be criminal acts, at least not conventional ones. No witnesses to suspicious activity. No motives identified. No suspects ever developed. And criminals do not typically arrange their victims' equipment in neat piles or leave watches on rocks. Medical emergencies might explain some elements of some cases. Confusion, erratic movement, poor decision-making. But they do not explain dogs losing trails completely. They do not explain equipment appearing in searched locations. They do not explain 3 men seeing 3 different things at the same spot. Some researchers who have studied disappearances like these have proposed explanations that go beyond conventional possibilities. Unusual electromagnetic phenomena that might affect perception and navigation. Undiscovered predators that leave no trace. Openings or doorways to somewhere else. These ideas are not proven. They may never be proven, but the conventional explanations have not worked either. What we are left with is the evidence. A GPS unit that recorded a man walking in circles. A cap hanging from a branch 7 feet high, 11 miles from where its owner vanished. Footprints that grew lighter and lighter until they disappeared. Trail camera images showing a man walking back and forth, never turning around. Something dark visible behind him in the final frame. Notebook entries written after a disappearance. A radio transmission from 40 miles away on a 2-mile radio. 3 witnesses who cannot agree on what they saw. The families of these men still wait for answers. The investigations remain open. The forests remain vast and indifferent and full of places where no one goes. Every year, hunters enter these woods. Most of them come home, but some do not. And among those who do not, there are cases like the ones we have examined. Cases where experience and preparation and knowledge of the terrain made no difference. Cases where something happened that does not fit any explanation. We do not know what that something is. We know that it happens. The evidence confirms that much. Men vanish. Strange traces are left behind. Questions multiply, but answers remain out of reach. The Boundary Waters in Minnesota. The Mark Twain Forest in Missouri. The Allegheny in Pennsylvania. The Daniel Boone in Kentucky. Kisatchie in Louisiana. The Ouachita in Arkansas. Different forests, different terrain, different climates, but similar patterns, similar outcomes. Something is happening in the American wilderness. Something that takes experienced people under circumstances that make no sense. Something that leaves behind evidence that only deepens the mystery. What that something is, we cannot say. But it is there. The cases prove that much. And it continues. Every November, when hunting season opens, thousands of men and women enter these forests. They carry rifles and GPS units and satellite messengers. They know the terrain. They have experience. They take precautions. Most of them come home. Most. That is where we leave this investigation. Not with answers, because there are none. Not with explanations, because none have held up. We leave it with questions. The same questions the families are asking. The same questions the investigators have asked. The same questions that hang in the air over these forests, unanswered. What happened to Raymond Tesler in those 9 hours of walking circles? What took Dennis Harwell from his tree stand without a sound? Whose footprints fade away to nothing in the Pennsylvania woods? What is the dark shape behind Curtis Blackwood in that final photograph? What did Gerald Hebert follow out of his tent? And where did it take him? What did Eugene Watts see that morning? And why did 3 men witness 3 different things? We do not know. Maybe someday we will. Until then, the forests keep their silence. And somewhere in the trees, something continues to happen that we do not understand. That is all for this series. If you made it this far, you are one of the people who wants to understand these cases as much as we do. You have watched all 3 parts. You have heard the evidence. You have your own thoughts about what it might mean. We want to hear those thoughts. Leave a comment below. Tell us which case disturbed you most. Tell us if any of this connects to something you have experienced or heard about. Tell us what you think is happening in these forests. We read every comment. Some of you have shared information that has helped us understand these cases better. Some of you have told us about disappearances we had never heard of. This is how the investigation continues, through people like you paying attention and sharing what you know. If you have not subscribed yet, now is the time. We will be covering more cases like these, more disappearances that do not make sense, more evidence that raises more questions than answers. The wilderness holds many secrets. We intend to keep documenting them. Hit the subscribe button. Turn on notifications. Share this video with someone who needs to see it. And the next time you go into the woods, pay attention. Notice what is around you. Trust your instincts if something feels wrong. These forests have been here longer than we have. They will be here long after we are gone. And whatever is happening in them, whatever has taken men like Raymond and Dennis and William and Curtis and Gerald and Eugene, it does not appear to be stopping. Stay safe out there. We will see you in the next one.